For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Yeah, I'm Jennifer Brown. I'm here to represent the Queensland Conservation Council.
Tyrone D'Lisle. I'm here to represent WePlanet Australia, which is the Australian chapter of the international environmental organisation WePlanet.
Yeah, my name's Stephen Nowakowski. I'm here representing Rainforest Reserve Australia.
Thank you. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Today, the committee authorised the recording of the proceedings by the media and individuals, but may withdraw this authorisation at any time. Any recordings are subject to the Parliament's resolution of 9th of December 2013 on the broadcasting of proceedings, which specifies that recordings are not permitted during suspensions of proceedings, shall not interfere with the conduct of the proceedings and must be made for the purpose of making a fair and accurate report on proceedings. Recordings cannot be used for political party advertising or election campaigns. Further details are available from the Secretariat. Before I invite you to make a brief opening statement and then we proceed to discussions, would you please state if you're a current or former member of a political party or a union or an investor in the renewable or nuclear industries?
No.
I used to be a member of the Queensland Greens and ran against Peter Dutton in 2013. I'm currently a member of the Fusion Party and not a member of any unions. Yep.
Previous member of the Australian Greens and ran twice for the Australian Greens.
Thank you. I now invite you to all make a brief opening opening statement, sorry.
Good morning and thanks for allowing me to speak. As mentioned, I'm Jennifer Brown from the Queensland Conservation Council, the peak environmental organisation for Queensland. We represent over 60 organisations across the state. For over 50 years, we've been supporting communities across the state to protect their natural environment against climate change and development. And here today in Queensland, we see drastic climate impacts happening not only to our biodiversity and our natural environment, but also to our communities that are still dealing with a lot of the impacts that we've seen in Cyclone Jasper. So we really need to be decarbonising at a rapid rate to be in line with what the IPC says. If we go to 2 degrees warming, 99% of the world's coral reefs will be gone. This isn't just a detrimental impact to the environment, but it's detrimental to the our food security, our security of where we live, and our wider economy. So we need to focus on how we can get to 1.5 to make sure we have a safe and secure world, not only for our communities, but for the broader. Within Queensland, to do this, to get to 1.5, we need to be at net zero by 2035. That's within a decade away. To date, we've reduced emissions by 30%, but the main thing that remains is the energy sector is the biggest polluter. And so within 1 decade, we need to reduce emissions. And that's why the Queensland Conservation does not think nuclear is the way forward. We've seen in international examples that the UAE has taken 18 years to put 1 nuclear power plant. The UK has taken 16 years just for construction and over 8 years for contracting and policy, and that's in a country that already has nuclear facilities. In addition, we have water concerns. The Tyrone's coal power station had to reduce its capacity during the millennium drought, whereas nuclear will be requiring the same amount of water, if not more, and that's not even taking into consideration the extensive amount of water that's needed for the risk of emergencies. Fukushima needed 1.3 million tonnes of water for the emergency to make sure it cools. Likewise, we have Lucas Height Medical Facility, and there is no way to deal with the waste currently to that in Australia. Is currently, as I understand, shipped to the UK and then shipped back to the site to be held there. So we continue to work with the community on climate change, but we do not see nuclear as the way forward for this in Australia or in Queensland due to the timeframes and the serious water and waste issues. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. We're at a crossroads. The climate crisis isn't in the distant future, it's here, driven by fossil fuel use and ecosystem destruction. The science is clear. We're heading for 2 degrees of warming, and how far we go beyond that and how resilient we are to the future, to that future depends on the decisions we make now. Energy is life. It's what lifts communities out of poverty, protects people from the elements, ensures access to education and healthcare, and unlocks a brighter future. The climate crisis at its core is an energy crisis. The story of the past century has been of people rising out of poverty by gaining access to more energy. This explains why, despite investment in clean energy globally, fossil fuels still account for over 80% of all energy used today, including here in Australia. People need access to energy, but it needs to be clean, meaning it needs to have minimal impacts on human health, our climate and biodiversity. Moving to a low-carbon future is complex and requires electrifying nearly everything: our cars, industries and homes. This will drive up demand for electricity, and while wind and solar are already making great contributions, betting everything on these variable, weather-dependent sources is risky, especially as our climate changes. Nuclear, on the other hand, is a proven, clean and reliable solution. Studies show its environmental footprint is similar or even lower than that of wind and solar, and it provides power around the clock. Nuclear can keep communities powered without air pollution or carbon emissions. Australia's nuclear ban, introduced in 1998, is outdated. It was created before the urgency of the climate crisis was fully understood. Recent polling shows more Australians today support nuclear than oppose it. This ban is morally and politically unjustifiable and no longer reflects our values or our needs in a warming world. Australia is a large country, but it's far from empty. There's cultural value, biodiversity and communities to protect. Nuclear's small land footprint lets us build clean energy infrastructure with minimal disruption to farming, conservation, cultural heritage and natural beauty. Nuclear energy brings jobs, good jobs, jobs that align with the skills of today's energy workers. It offers good wages, reliable work and a just transition that lifts up entire communities. Finally, the ban doesn't mean we have to build nuclear tomorrow. It just gives us options, more flexibility, and the energy challenge doesn't end in 2050. We need abundant, sustainable energy for the rest of humanity's future. So I ask, are we ready to protect our climate, economy and future? Are we ready to meet this moment with courage, optimism and a willingness to change? Thank you.
Thank you. Just the report you spoke about in your opening statement, would you just be able to table that to the Secretariat, please?
I can do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Stephen Nowakowski and I'm here today as a representative of Rainforest Reserves Australia. My professional background is cartography, map making, and I received an associate diploma at QUT and subsequently worked in the profession at Port of Brisbane and Cairns Port Authority. I want to thank the Select Committee for allowing our organisation to be represented here today. As a grassroots, volunteer-based conservation organisation, Rainforest Reserves Australia is devoted to restoring land for nature by planting over 300,000 trees. We also operate the Tableland Cassowary Rehabilitation Facility and we care for orphaned and injured cassowaries. We also have 2 active court cases at the moment striving to halt the Upper Burdekin Gawara Bayer wind development and the Mount Fox Energy Storage System, BESS. These projects are poised to wreak havoc on endangered species in the Seaview Range of North Queensland, once earmarked to be a national park. I believe Rainforest Reserves Australia has the most comprehensive renewables mapping data done to date and makes for some very sobering contemplation. To achieve targets, we would require tens of thousands of wind turbines, hundreds of thousands of hectares of short-lived glass panels, rare earth intensive batteries, pumped hydro requiring the damming of our rivers, and a transmission heavy system that has to be overbuilt by a factor of 3. All this needs constant replacing every 8 to 12 years for batteries and 20 or so years for wind and sun collectors. The entire system needs to be backed up and firmed with vast amounts of new gas consumption to keep it all running. In fact, coal seam gas is here to stay forever if we rely on this approach. I'm keen to discuss the spatial footprint of all this, if I'm given the opportunity here today. Our treasured natural habitats are not mere resources to be exploited. They are vital, living networks that help sequester carbon and shelter countless species. We have witnessed high biodiverse habitats such as Caban, Mount Emerald and Clark Creek wind developments become vast energy zones that have become inhospitable to native wildlife. This raises a pressing question. Why are we as a nation committing ourselves to this path of renewable energy at such a cost? Our current trajectory seems to put wind and solar solutions above the vital contributions that our natural ecosystems provide in mitigating climate change. There are also economic implications with this strategy. The financial burden of transitioning from a reliable electricity supply to a reliance on intermittent and costly wind and solar systems is becoming unsustainable. As we desperately seek to meet ambitious government targets, we are left scrambling for the mineral resources needed for these technologies, and this sets us on a precarious and potentially perilous path. Transitioning to nuclear power could revitalise Australia's energy landscape as we phase out of coal, and nuclear facilities could go alongside retiring coal plants. We can utilise all their existing infrastructure. We have researched that nuclear power is not just an alternative, but rather a necessary conversation we need to have for the protection of our unique biodiversity and our regional communities. The land used and the minerals and materials required for wind and solar significantly dwarf the minimal need for space and materials required for nuclear plants. And witnessing our magnificent coastal ranges and Great Dividing Range being blown up with dynamite as we speak, as our mountains are smashed and flattened for short-lived junk energy, is something that our precious wildlife does not deserve. Our mountain ranges are our biodiversity refugia areas, and to flatten these areas in the name of green energy is a deception of the highest order. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Kennedy, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, no, hi. How are you, gentlemen? Thanks for coming today, and sorry I can't be there in person. Firstly, let me just make sure I've got everybody's names right. I was just taking notes. Steve, just look, understanding the interest, what you were talking about in preserving fauna and flora, can you please explain and talk a little more about the impact of renewable projects in Queensland, particularly, and reference specific projects?
Yeah, so look, yes, we've done mapping for Queensland. At the moment, we've got 685 existing turbines proposed at different levels of the approval process, 3,508 turbines, which brings us up to about 4,100 turbines. That would deliver about 22 gigawatt. The capacity factor of that energy source in Queensland is very poor, 15 to 30%. So we're going to need to triple that to achieve reliable power on a summer's night if pumped hydro and, obviously solar isn't going. So what we're looking at is we're looking around 12,000 turbines are required in Queensland alone. So what, and that equates to, we actually got Jeanette Kemp. She's the senior, don't have the document. I don't have the document here. Yeah, I'll table the report. She's mapped, using our data, about 118,000 hectares of classified remnant forest to be impacted upon. 118,000 hectares in Queensland to be impacted by renewable projects.
Yep. And can you just contrast that for me with, if Australia developed a nuclear industry, what would be the similar land impact? So you've got 118,000 kilometres. What would the nuclear sort of comparison look like?
Well, 118,000 hectares of classified remnant to be impacted by renewables. We can simply put in, Westinghouse AP1000 reactors right next to retiring coal plants, very similar to what Poland has just reached financial close. About 2 weeks ago, Poland reached financial close for 3.3 gigawatt, 3 Westinghouse reactors. They'll be commissioned by 2032, and that's going to cost $30 billion US. So we could simply put something like that next to our retiring coal plants at Stanwell, Tyrone, Collide, and it'll be far, far cheaper than this overbuild of renewables. And we even heard a speaker just recently, just before us, talk about pumped hydro, and he said the overbuild is, he said 10 times is what the overbuild is required. So, yeah, huge amounts of overbuild of electricity. You've got to remember, 43% of our electricity bill is transmission, and we need to build about 28,000 kilometres of new transmission.
Sorry, Mr. No,
Yes, yes.
I'm not sure. Hang on, Simon.
Sorry.
Just one sec, Mr. Bennell.
I'm not sure that the previous witness did say 10 times the overbuild. I don't know if we've got the ability to check what was said.
Yeah.
Can I just continue with my questions? Maybe we can do that later.
We can do that later, Mr.
Yeah,
Bennell.
yeah.
Mr. Kennedy?
Yep.
Yes.
And given reports today, there's modelling saying the current plan, AEMO's ISP, is actually five times more costly than it is stated to be.
Yep.
Meaning it's costing over $500 billion more.
Yep.
Is that surprising to you?
No, it's not, because the Queensland government just bought Lotus Creek Wind Farm for $1.3 billion. And that's 46 turbines. So that equates to about $28 million per turbine in a greenfield site. We've mapped 21,000 turbines proposed for Australia. And if you extrapolate that out, you're looking at, just say we say hypothetically $25 million a turbine, you're looking at well over $500 billion just in turbines alone. And that excludes transmission, pumped hydro, short-lived batteries, solar, and then it all needs to be backed up by brand new gas plants. So my back-of-the-envelope calculation comes to about 1.3 trillion, which falls in line with the net zero report, which is 1.5 trillion by 2032. So I thought it'd be more than that 500 billion. I thought my estimation is about 1.3 trillion total cost by 2030 or 2032.
Yeah, well. And if we look at Australia's transmission rollout, the timelines of hydro projects like Snowy or offshore wind, would you say these are fast to build or simple to build projects, or what's your view in?
Well, yeah, if we look at Poland are saying that they can build those Westinghouse reactors by 2032. I don't know, how long is Snowy Hydro going to be built? How long will that take? How long will Barumba pumped hydro take? How long for Youngla? We just realised that was $32 billion. How long for tens of thousands of new transmission? Vast amounts of solar. I firmly believe nuclear is a known quantity. We can do it, we can deliver it, get it done, and we can be net zero within 10 to 15 years, and then we can move on to the real pressing challenges, which is revegetating degraded landscapes and looking after this country and sequestering carbon.
And on degraded landscape, sorry to jump around a little bit, you said 180,000 for Queensland. Have you looked at that for the rest of Australia, what the impact will be on vegetation?
No, not remnant vegetation, no.
Just for Queensland. So
Yeah.
180,000 for Queensland.
118,000.
118, I'm sorry, I misheard you there.
The reason why it's so much is because in Queensland, at the moment, we've got 508 kilometres of roads that have been built between turbines. That's going to have to increase to 4,853 kilometres of brand new haulage roads to be punched into all the wild, remote, rugged hills of the Great Dividing Range. And then we get things like edge effects on those forests, and those forests will change. And we're already seeing that at the Caban wind farm site.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Can I just ask Tyrone a question? Tyrone, I heard you say you're formerly a member of the Greens. I'm guessing you'd consider yourself an environmentalist. I'd just like you to could you explain to me what your journey on nuclear and how your views have evolved in the role nuclear could play in Australia's energy mix?
Final question, Mr.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Yes, absolutely. I was a member of the Queensland Greens for several years. I didn't have a firm view on nuclear. Like most people in the general public, I knew about Chernobyl and Fukushima. and I was happy to delegate my views on nuclear to the party elders. But I came to look at the scale of the climate challenge and what would be required to genuinely address it if we are to meet the crisis. And I came to the conclusion over a number of years that we just won't be able to achieve it unless we include technologies like nuclear energy. And that's a view that many other people in the environmental movement have, and many Greens, especially younger Greens. The mood within the party is shifting. In fact, a lot of younger Greens tell me that they will be pushing to have the party change their position once some of the more senior leaders of the party move on. They're basically holding on to the policy out of respect. So there's been a real shift globally as well. The Finnish Greens, for instance, now have a very pro-nuclear policy. They understand the importance of nuclear energy in the clean energy mix. Just this past weekend, the Ontarian Green Party also changed their policy in favour of nuclear energy. There's also a big push within the Green Party in the UK. So, and WePlanet is an international organisation that is represented in 18 countries around the world, including in the global south, like countries like Kenya and Uganda, who are also looking at nuclear energy. If you think that those countries can achieve nuclear energy but Australia can't, then I think people have a very unambitious view of what Australia can achieve.
Thank you very much. Look, I've got a couple more questions. If we have time, Chair, I'd love to circle back.
Yep, no worries, Mr Kennedy. You had a fair run there, so we'll see how we go with time. Mr Burnell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming and providing evidence today. I want to just go back to some of that questioning from Mr Kennedy around something that you just said, Mr Nowakowski, that we could reach net zero within 10 to 15 years. Now, that's under the pursuit of a nuclear program?
It would still be challenging to get to net zero even with nuclear in that time frame. What I'm saying is that we should get on with it and get these reactors built, and that will take a big chunk. That will be the heavy lifting of our carbon emissions.
What I'd like to actually understand then,
yes,
and this is to anybody at the panel here. So, do you see a place for renewables within the energy market mix, or are you suggesting that we need to go much heavier into the pursuit of nuclear energy generation, power generation in this country? Because based on on the opening statement by yourself, Mr Nowakowski, and Mr. D'Lisle, I got the impression that you don't see a place for renewables, and if there isn't a place for renewables in the energy mix under your vision, then I'm assuming that means that there has to be a pursuit under a wholehearted effort to go all in on nuclear. If that is the case, then how many reactors are we talking about across the country? Because I don't think that 7 sites under the current proposed plan or policy, I get confused which one it is that the Deputy Chair calls it, but this paper does not indicate that there is anything beyond 7 sites. So are we talking about 10 to 20 reactors on these sites to make up this pursuit?
I'm happy to take this first, if you like.
Let's go.
So I'm not here to defend Coalition's plan, policy, whatever you want to call it. I personally think that this inquiry is into nuclear energy, if that's correct. That's what the terms of reference say. It's not an inquiry into the Coalition's policy. So we advocate nuclear energy alongside renewables. A lot of the current debate is about meeting existing electricity demand, but the AEMO predict that we will probably have 2 to 2.5 times more electricity demand by 2050. That's likely to be more if we want to do things like the Future Made in Australia plan. And also we need to decarbonise other industries, including our food sector. We can't continue to rely on livestock, for instance. That's a huge impact on our environment. So we might want to move into sustainable proteins, which use electricity to brew proteins. So we don't know what the future will hold in terms of energy demand. So we believe that there is the ability to have renewables and nuclear side by side, because at the moment we already are building two parallel systems. We're building a renewables and energy storage system, and we're building a gas-fired backup system. That doesn't get talked about. How are you going to pay to have those reserves sitting there, and what's that going to cost in terms of emissions? Even if you're not burning that in the gas power station itself, you still have to extract that gas. There's leaks all along that fuel cycle. So what we're saying is, instead of having a renewables and gas system, we should have a renewables and nuclear system, and that's what we believe will get to net zero for Australia.
So that's WePlanet's position. So Rainforest Reserve Australia.
Rainforest Reserve. So this is a step change chart. I can't see anywhere where emissions actually get reduced in that chart.
So sorry, Mr. Nowakowski, I asked you specifically what your position is regarding energy mix, specifically to nuclear. Do you believe that the current proposal being put forward by the Liberal National Party under their policy document meets the expectation that you were talking about before around the unacceptable destruction that is being caused by renewables? What I get from your opening statement is that you don't believe that it's going far enough into the nuclear power generation.
I firmly believe we need as much nuclear as we can to reduce the amount of industrial scale renewables that are taking away our agricultural land and our wild places. The problem here in Queensland is we don't have a good wind resource, and our wind resources are our high mountains. So, or there is a good wind resource out west, but then it's the transmission issue around Forsyth and Hewenden. There's some good wind resources. So renewables, renewables are a part of the solution, but I think we're going too far down that. We're going to end up, like Andrew Dyer said, we're going to end up with a duplicate, redundant or stranded assets, because everything is done in such an ad hoc, random, chaotic way with the rollout of renewables.
What I'm getting confused about then on the basis is that if you're saying that we've got a mix where you support a renewables program in conjunction with a nuclear program, then the concerns you're raising about the destruction of forests, etc., like that doesn't stop if the renewable program is underway. So I feel like you're saying that the renewable program's just got to be stopped dead in the water.
Well, there has to be a moratorium. There has to be a moratorium. Andrew Dyer has said that there needs to be a moratorium on the rollout of industrial scale renewables. Things like community consultation and benchmarks have to be met.
We should stop the transition and take stock of what's going on.
Exactly. That's Andrew Dyer, the Minister for Infrastructure, or not Minister, the Infrastructure Commissioner said that, yes.
Okay. I'm interested to get your thoughts, Mrs Brown.
From the Queensland Conservation Council's perspective, we are focused on renewables and backing that up with storage. If we just look, even without looking at utility facilities for renewables, in Queensland 10% of our renewables come from rooftop solar. And at the moment, this is just specifically for people that tend to own homes. That's not even open to renters or open to apartment blocks. If you're able to open that up and provide a way that the government is starting to do here in Queensland to be able to get storage in people's houses, along with bringing out how we've talked about other battery storage areas that's happening around the world, we'll be able to get to decarbonise. I do agree, though, that there is issues around Queensland with some projects, and this isn't necessarily a reflection of the technology itself. It's a reflection of the planning and economic failures of not consulting the community, of not going with them and putting the community first and the environment first. And if we did that properly, which the Queensland Conservation has got a project mapping and working with communities across Queensland next year, then we'll be able to roll it out faster in a way that actually protects the environment and actually puts communities first.
I want to go to something else that you mentioned specifically, Ms Brown, in your opening statement around Fukushima and the requirement of, I think, was that 1.3 trillion?
1.3 million tonnes of water was required during the emergency, just for the cooling.
And I'm sure that people there thought that the nuclear program was going to be safe and there was going to be no risk to people in the community and also no threat to the environment. Can you, or are you able to talk to some of the impacts that disaster caused on the local ecosystems there, and would you share similar concerns around a nuclear power facility here in Australia and for our, surrounding ecosystems if there was to be an unexpected disaster?
So it completely destroyed the fishing industry there for a number of years. They weren't able to fish, they weren't able to, and you had a lot, I don't know specifically, specific species impacts, etc. But what we'd expect here is that you would see increase, if there was a similar one, increasing mutations or increasing risks to certain species here. It would also, when we're looking at agriculture, if there was such a risk in those areas that are proposed for the plants, they'd have to highlight on their food stock that it has been contaminated, and they would have restrictions on selling it, which for me is a great risk to those communities which are already having a lot of water risks with nuclear proposals, but also if this ever happened. You also have the risk of when you're putting back that water, if it's in such large quantities, the main risk with a lot of nuclear is having to, not necessarily chemical, but putting it back to what the warming level is, so it's not as hot as what is around the ecosystem. So for instance, if we started having to flush that into areas in the natural environment, you'd be putting in water that was multiple degrees higher.
Okay.
Can I just add to that?
Like to, yeah.
Yes. Ms Brown is correct that there has been impacts on the fishing industry around the Fukushima Daiichi plant that was impacted by a magnitude 9 earthquake and a 15-metre tsunami. But a lot of that impact on the fishing industry has been around perception of safety. And groups like Greenpeace, for instance, have stirred up perceptions that this is unsafe catch to purchase and consume. But what we are seeing is that the government in Japan has provided certain guarantees that these are safe. And it's really disheartening to see communities continue to be impacted by the fear of radiation, not necessarily by the radiation itself. So I think that the government of any government of the day needs to ensure that there is proper public awareness of nuclear science and nuclear matters, including radiation. For instance, we saw something come off a mining truck in Western Australia, and there's a great panic about that. But really, these substances aren't that dangerous. And we saw I believe it was either ANSTO or Panza arrived on the ground, and they found it within 30 minutes or something. There's very good skills. We're able to track radiation and monitor it. They've also found health studies that there was no need to do an evacuation around Fukushima. Tragically, 2,000 elderly and people and patients died from the stress of the evacuation, but no one has died from the radiation. Most people have been able to return to the area around the power station. We have to remember also that this is a 1960s era reactor. Any reactor built in Australia, one would hope that a government would be sensible enough to build a modern reactor design that has gone through the learning processes post-Fukushima to build in the backups and redundancies. So while events like these are tragic, they have provided learning lessons for the nuclear industry, and it's one of the safest industries around the world. If you look at life cycle impacts on human health, nuclear actually has lower deaths per terawatt hour than wind, and only very slightly higher than solar.
Thank you, Mr Burnell. Mr Chester.
Well, Madam Chair, thank you to the witnesses. I apologise I can't be there. Just for the sake of clarity in relation to the Coalition's policy, which is very much focused on a balanced energy mix. Now, I've heard, as I understand from all three witnesses today, that there are concerns with a renewables-only system in the sense that it forces governments to accept projects almost anywhere, and there's been some errors made in Queensland in relation to the siting of large-scale, industrial-scale renewable projects. So our view is that supporting renewables with nuclear will lessen the reliance on the renewable projects and mean governments can be more selective. So I'm interested, Mr D'Lisle, in your comments regarding the movement within the younger Greens that, in essence, they believe that opposing nuclear energy on environmental grounds is outdated thinking and that Australia's ban on nuclear energy should be removed. And in fact, they're only not pushing that position out of respect to party elders. Can you just expand on that, on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a history within the Greens of opposing infrastructure projects that impact on the natural environment. We've seen the Green Party elder Bob Brown, for instance, oppose wind turbines down in Tasmania, and of course, famously, the Franklin River Dam hydro project in Tasmania, which the Labor Party killed off during the Hawke government. And we recently saw Jonathan Sriranganathan come out and oppose the Burdekin Paradise pumped hydro project as well. So there has been a history and a growing concern of the impacts of renewable energy projects on our environment and on our communities. But there's a growing understanding that unless we want to dramatically reduce our high energy lifestyle, we need to have increasing amounts of clean energy. So we are limited in the options that we have for that. It is either a mass build out of variable renewable sources. We don't have a lot of hydro resources in this country. We may be able to unlock geothermal thanks to new drilling techniques that came out of the fracking industry. But we are limited in the range of technologies that we have. And nuclear energy ticks all the boxes when it comes to low land use, low environmental impact, low human health impacts. So our position is, and it's a growing position amongst the environmental movement, is that nuclear needs to be included in the mix.
Just for clarity, and I'm sorry I wasn't in the room, I think it was you that made the reference that 100% weather-dependent energy system is risky. And that our current moratorium on nuclear is morally and politically unjustifiable. Was it you that made that comment?
Yes, that was my comment. So we have seen countries...
Sorry. I just invite you to expand on that. Sorry, Mr D'Lisle.
No worries. So we have seen countries around the world have grids that are 100% renewable. One would, if you're using the bucket term renewable, but that's a broad category that includes everything from hydro and geothermal, which are dispatchable sources of energy, all the way through to variable sources such as wind and solar. Australia, as I just mentioned, doesn't have a lot of hydro resources. We don't know what the geothermal potential is in Australia. So the current plan is to rely primarily on variable wind and solar. And as our climate changes, there is the potential for a phenomenon called global stilling, which is where we see average wind speeds across the planet reduce, which could impact on wind turbines, wind generation. We've seen increasing bushfires across our country. CSIRO has found that on bushfire days, the smoke and the haze significantly reduces solar output. We're seeing increased low pressure systems across the east coast of Australia, which is diminishing wind capacities. So we are seeing a changing climate as the world is warming up. There's potential for tipping points as well, which could have unforeseen consequences on the weather systems. So if we're building a system that primarily relies on the wind and on the ability to collect sunshine, then there is a real risk that in a high energy society such as the one that we want to have here in Australia, that we won't be able to provide reliable energy. And that we may choose that we want to have a society where we restrict our energy use to times when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, but that's not a society that I believe most Australians would want to live in.
Thank you. Mr. Nowakowski, I just want to reference your comments regarding your work in revegetating degraded landscapes and some feedback I've received from my colleagues and the nationals throughout Queensland in relation to natural habitat and biodiversity. What is concerning them and their constituents is the loss of habitat on these high ridges, which have effectively become biodiversity arcs in the sense that they haven't been cleared for farming, but they have a very important biodiversity role. And I think it was your evidence indicated that the installation of wind turbines on those ridge tops was having a major impact on biodiversity. Can you just expand on what species are being impacted or threatened by this type of activity?
Yeah, and that's a really important question because we don't even know. So the cumulative impact of all these projects we don't know what that is happening. So there's a researcher up in North Queensland called Dr. Roger Martin. He's a retired mammal expert, and he's taken it upon himself to try to monitor the impact on koalas with wind farms. And he's finding what's happening. He's doing radio tracking up at Caban, where there were koalas. And what he's finding is that they're now exiting the area and not coming in within 4 kilometres of wind turbines. It's pushing koalas away because what's happening is there's the low frequency sound, and also too that the male's mating call is being masked by the low frequency sound. And that's just koalas. We have no idea what these turbines are doing to other mammal species, and we don't even know what's happening with amphibians such as frogs, because males need to croak at night to attract females. They now need to compete with low frequency sound. And none of that research has been done. We have no idea whatsoever what these impacts are on Australian wildlife. And it's very troubling. And like I said, we've got about 4,100 turbines earmarked for the coastal ranges and the Great Dividing Range, and we don't know what that impact is on amphibians and mammals. So it's quite scary, really.
I'll just add also the impact on bats. So bats are vital to the forest ecosystems across Queensland, and bats are choosing to avoid areas where these wind turbines operate, and ones that do stray into the area are often killed by the turbines spinning. So if we lose the bats across these forested areas, we will have significant impacts on the health of those forests.
Can I pick up on 3 things that we've been discussing? So I'll go straight to the wind farms you mentioned. So yes, bats are affected, but for instance, I know that the Caban wind farm, the compliance report in the EPBC has said that this year 336 bats have died from the wind farms and 61 birds. But when you've looked at pre-construction and post-construction, because now they have enough information, the populations have not been significantly impacted. You can also compare that to a climate-induced heat wave that happened around the same area that killed in 2018, that killed 23,000 flying foxes. So, there has to be a comparison of we are still getting, if we are not rolling out renewable energy, and if there is issues with wind turbines, we are still going to have impacts on biodiversity and the environment from climate change. When you also look at the land needed from renewables, we believe at Queensland Conservation Council, Queensland has enough space and sunlight to actually be able to do this. When you compare what the land clearing is in Queensland on a yearly basis for renewables, it is within the infrastructure section, so 0.5% of land clearing When you compare that to 80% is for agriculture. So that's a tiny percentage of what it is overall of what the land clearing is. And again, we do need better planning legislation. There's no doubt about that. But hey, it's pretty good opportunity for those of you in the room that get to look at the EPBC reforms this year. So maybe once you go back down south, you can have a look at that and try and sort it out for us lot up here.
Sorry, Mr. Nowakowski, I realise the time is short, and I want to...
Final question, Mr. Chester.
Thank you, Mr. Nowakowski. I want to reference your commentary regarding the use of existing proven technology, such as the Westinghouse technology, and contrast that to the evidence we heard previously about a computer-based model on a hydro scheme. What is your understanding of how that existing proven technology in nuclear energy, how it could be rolled out in Australia and effectively reuse or recycle the existing transmission lines without having the environmental impacts of new transmission lines? Is it your understanding that that sort of technology could be applied to the existing transmission network quite readily in the future?
Yeah, I'll answer that. Just with regards to Caban, that's only 1 year of data. We're finding that raptors across the Mount Emerald wind farm have declined over time, so we're only looking at 1 year of data for bats. In terms of agriculture, most of the land that's been cleared in Queensland is Category X or re-veg. It's not remnant forest. So we're talking about two different things here. Getting back to your question about nuclear, I didn't really actually catch it too well, but the beauty about nuclear is that we can put them next to retiring coal plants and use the existing infrastructure, and that way we don't need high voltage transmission lines cutting through state forests and national parks and fragmenting all of what's left of our remnant forests. So that's the beauty about nuclear, is that we can use that existing infrastructure, if that's what your question was asking.
Yeah, that was the reference, just in the sense that it was proven technology that could be applied to existing transmission rather than requiring the new transmission and the environmental impacts that would follow.
Well, that's right, yeah. So up North Queensland, for example, there's a high road wind farm. That will need about 12 kilometres of high voltage lines to cut through the Bluff State Forest. And there's greater gliders, magnificent brood frogs and all sorts of, rare and threatened species in that state forest. But the old school conservation groups are happy to sacrifice that for clean green energy. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chester. Mr. Perrott.
Thank you. Mr. Nowakowski, could you just tell me how many square kilometres of rainforest is in your current package, that Rainforest Reserve looks after?
Well, I can't tell you that. We have
just approximately.
The Marine Nature Refuge.
Is that the only one you have in your portfolio?
That's right. Yes, yeah. We don't go and buy land and then hold on to it for conservation. No, we re-veg people's degraded land.
Okay.
Yes, and so we run a nursery.
So how many hectares is that one?
Marine Nature, I can't tell you off the top of my head. Approximately?
Is it bigger than a backyard? Is it?
Oh yeah, probably 12 hectares or something.
12 hectares?
20 acres.
Okay. I just noticed that you focus on the impact of renewables on vegetation. I'd heard evidence earlier from the Queensland Conservation Council, not today, Ms Brown, but that one of the biggest concerns was the clearing of vegetation for meat production, as touched on by Mr D'Lisle. Yes. Irrespective, the koalas don't really care what the category of land is, but if the vegetation is being cleared for meat production, then the koalas are impacted, and the bats and every other thing. Why particularly focus on renewables? Can you back up what I just said?
As I mentioned, between 2020 and 2021, 350,000 hectares were cleared in Queensland, and 80% of that was indeed for land and agriculture, which predominantly is meat production. 0.5% of that.
Which would seem to be a lot more than the areas you're talking about. And we
I'd love to
haven't gone on to the 86 coal mines or the...
so I'd love to answer that.
Please, thank you. Why focus on that, Mr. Nowakowski?
Because what we're seeing in North Queensland, in central Queensland, is the clearing of ridgetop refugia forests that have not been touched before for industrialisation, urbanisation and high-value agriculture. And secondly, with renewables, there is no end game. This is the end game. This is the net zero report for 2050. This is the end game. 7 times the spatial footprint of the state of Tasmania covered in glass and steel.
But, so if I could just go back to the question, why
So I'll table that, yeah. That's the net zero report.
Why focus on the one doing significantly less clearing rather than the one doing the most clearing, which is what Ms Brown has just...
Well, exactly. Well, I worked for Greenpeace last year. I had a 6-month contract photographing broad-scale land clearing events for beef, because that's where the funding was coming from philanthropy from the US, particularly focused on beef. And yes, it's clearing a lot of land. The issue there, though, is a lot of the land is Category X or regrowth. So the landowners need to keep clearing that land within every 30 years to keep it at that category. So that's an issue with the Vegetation Management Act. The Vegetation Management Act control that land clearing for beef. The wind farm industry is exempt from the Vegetation Management Act.
But not from the EPBC. I think you suggested it was, didn't you? You said
no.
I think your evidence was that there is no consideration of the impacts on
So
animals.
wind and solar go through as code accessible at local council level.
Yep.
They go to state.
Yep.
Through State Code 23. The vegetation clearing then gets referred to State Code 16, which is a free kick. They can clear whatever they like. Farmers can't clear land under that code, or except if it's for beef. And then it goes to the federal government under the EPBC Act if there is endangered, threatened, or vulnerable species on that land.
So there is a check and balance. You suggested earlier that there wasn't.
No, I never said that. No.
Oh.
Can I just add to that as well?
Yeah.
We've had an update to Wind Code 23 that he referred to on the state level that has increased environmental assessments for threatened species, and the government also just put out a new regulation framework proposal for renewables. So, we accept that it's an issue, and we are, as we've said, working with communities, but on the renewable aspects, there is a bit of movement and we're trying to improve it.
Yeah, well,
okay.
The new state code is just window dressing. Yep.
Okay. And now I think you said you were a cartographer. Is your training?
That's right, yes.
Were you being fair dinkum when you said that renewables are levelling the Great Dividing Range, or was that a bit of hyperbole?
I'll table the maps for you.
No, come on. You can't be fair dinkum.
Okay, fair dinkum.
I mean, you actually said in your evidence that they want to put renewables as high as possible, but you're saying that they're also going to demolish the Great Dividing Range.
20,000 kilometres of brand new roads. So, for example, at Caban,
and that's just alongside the wind towers that have been there for 30 years.
These are new ones, yes.
Yeah, but the other ones have been there they were certainly there in the 80s.
Well, there's the Windy Hill wind. Yep. 2 have already exploded, caught fire. They're at the end of their lives, so they'll be decommissioned very soon.
They've been there for nearly 40 years.
No, 30 years. Sorry, about 25, 26.
Yeah. So not the 8 years that you suggested.
No, 8 years for batteries, lithium batteries.
Okay. Because we had evidence yesterday from when we were at Stanwell that they were looking at 15 years to 20 years.
Okay. So at Stanwell, that's $770 million of batteries going in there. How are they going to get charged? So what I've been told is they'll charge them using power in the middle of the day, using coal, and then discharge at night when power prices are high. So they'll buy cheaper energy in the day and then discharge at night. There's no surplus energy yet available to charge those batteries. $770 million worth of batteries at Stanwell, and they don't even know how to charge them.
Oh, I think they've got a plan to...
Well, what's the plan to charge the batteries? What's the plan to charge the batteries? $770 million worth of batteries.
Let's get back to the terms of reference.
Nuclear, okay. And I was just wondering if with your interactions with farmers and environmentalists and community groups in North Queensland and Central Queensland, the concerns about nuclear power.
Yep.
And you could chip in here, Mr. D'Lisle. So, the United States has had nuclear power for 60, 70 years, the UK from the early 50s, Canada, similar sort of timeframes. None of them have a long-term solution for for nuclear waste, or the transportation of nuclear waste is still problematic. Do you have anyone that you've encountered in your discussions, pro-nuclear discussions, raised that idea? How we're going to store stuff for 100,000 years, or what is it, 4.8 million years, the half-life for some of the isotopes?
Yeah, I can take that first. Your first part of your question was about farmers and their concerns. What we see internationally is that those living closest to nuclear power stations often have the highest regard for those facilities, as they bring jobs, economic opportunity, and also stability to the region. Often there is an exclusion zone where they don't allow certain activities such as residential development. So that protects a lot of agricultural land from residential urban sprawl.
It's unsafe for people to live, but they'll let them farm nearby.
Well, it's not unsafe. It's just a regulation of the whatever that particular
based on an arbitrary regulation, or based on some science?
No more follow-up questions, Mr. Barrett.
It's based on best practice. So there in nuclear science, there is a theory called the nonlinear no threshold theory, where it suggests that any exposure to radiation is dangerous to public health. But we know that that's incorrect because we have data points. You are radioactive, I'm radioactive, a banana is radioactive. We know from people who live near power stations or who have been accidentally exposed to radiation that there is a limit to that the human body can can resist to a point before we start seeing health effects coming on. So a lot of these regulations are based on that out of an abundance of caution. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is unsafe, it's just out of an abundance of caution. So we'll be up to whichever regulator in Australia or overseas to determine such outcomes. When it comes to the waste, that is often the most pressing question that I get from members of the community. And it's one that's often based on misunderstandings of, for instance, The Simpsons. We've seen some Labor MPs share green glue goop from The Simpsons and three-eyed fish, for instance. But
I think there might be more science behind it than The Simpsons, Mr. D'Lisle.
Yes, I agree, and it's disappointing to see some MPs share misinformation like that. So if we are to have an informed discussion about nuclear energy, then we need to inform people about how waste and radiation works. So a lot of this waste will immediately become less dangerous because radiation naturally decays over time. And in fact, the longer the half-life, you often hear 4.5 billion years, the longer the half-life, the less dangerous the element is. And most of the radiation decays rapidly in the first few hundred years. So within about 500 years, the high-level waste that comes out of the reactor has decayed to a level where it's safe to stand around. After that point, you would have to crush the metal rods up and ingest it or inhale it for it to be dangerous. But to that point, we still believe, based on this linear no threshold theory, that the best way of addressing the waste question is to place it in a deep geological repository. We heard from Geosciences Australia in their testimony to this inquiry that Australia is the most stable geological continent. So what they do is they drill down below the water table and they place the waste in there. So we're seeing Finland, for instance, opening the world's first deep geological repository. Their government is actually considering importing waste from other countries because they see the commercial value in offering that service. We saw the Labor government down in South Australia go through a royal commission to consider that. Unfortunately, the politics messed that up, but that could have been a good opportunity for the people of South Australia. So there are options. There's also a closed fuel cycle. So countries like France and Japan, they recycle their waste. Up to 90% of the uranium and energy within the used fuel can be recycled into new fuel. And there's other types of reactors called breeder reactors where you can then continue to recycle that fuel through. Estimates, for example, of the used fuel currently stored in the UK could provide 500 years of the current demand if we just recycled the fuel there. So this waste is not something for us to be fearful for. It's actually a strategic reserve for the future, and it will be up to us as a society whether we engage in evidence and facts or if we go down the road of Simpsons and three-eyed fish.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. We are out of time, but I have just a couple of questions. So you said you want to have an informed discussion.
I absolutely.
Do you think the coalition should be giving us an informed discussion and informed information about these 7 sites and about how many reactors are on each site? We've had Mr. Nowakowski say that we need to stop renewables right now and we need to build nuclear power stations right now. You have said that.
Yeah, so
we need
to take stock,
yep.
because we're going to end up with a duplication of assets or stranded assets, as per Andrew Dyer's report.
Yep, no worries. So you also said about the, let's just say the 900 gigawatt required for what we're going to later on in the 2050s, and there was also a lot higher amounts there. How many nuclear reactors are we going to be required to have in this country?
Well, what I'd like to see is all that taken out and we just swap out like
This hasn't answered the question. This hasn't answered the question.
Okay.
How many nuclear reactors?
So I think Australia uses...
How many giga nuclear reactors are going to be required? How much is going to be required on the 7 sites? Because you just said the AP 1000
Yep.
is a good one. There's 3.3 gig just been done for
Poland.
30 in Poland for 30
financial close.
billion US.
30 billion
which
US.
is about
10
46
billion per gig.
46 billion for us, give or take. How many of those are going to be required on each 7 sites? How many gig on each
Well, I
site?
don't need a calculator.
Okay, well, let's just give me a rough.
I can't answer you that. All I know is that we should just be getting on with it. What we need to do is phase out retiring coal plants with like-for-like nuclear to start with. That's what I like to see.
And no, sorry.
I would just like to go to your original question. As I said earlier, we are currently building 2 parallel systems, one a renewable and storage system and one a gas backup system. Our position is that we should be having a renewable and energy storage system and nuclear. What the final energy mix comes out to be will depend on government policy. When it comes to the coalition policy, I'm not here to defend the coalition's policy, but I believe that they should put information to the public before the election, as should the Labor Party or any party put their full costings
We have put our full costings forward. It's the AEMO report, which is $122 billion. We trust the energy experts. That's what we do. We trust the energy experts.
So Snowy's not in there. Snowy's not in there. Barumba pumped hydrate.
We trust the energy experts.
Okay, right. Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for your time today.